Hello, everybody. Adam Parks here with another episode of Receivables Roundtable. Today, I am here with my friend Rick Winters, who is with the National Credit Adjusters. How you doing today, Rick?
I'm doing good. Thanks, Adam, for having me.
Absolutely. I always do enjoy our little chats at conferences, and I thought today we could have a fun little chat about digital communications from the perspective of being a debt buyer. And I know this is something that I have discussed before on the podcast, but has generally been from the perspective of technology companies that are deploying that technology versus debt buyers who are in the mix deploying as well. But before we get started going down that path, for anybody who hasn't had the pleasure of meeting you at a conference like I have, could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got to the seat that you're in today?
Sure. So I'm currently with National Credit Adjusters as their Director of Portfolio Strategy, and I've been with National Credit Adjusters for about 6 years. And you got to jump back quite a few years with me in terms of when I started in this industry. And I, like most, I started as a collector back in early 2000s, let's just say that, with a company out of Minnesota by the name of Fingerhut. And some may recall that name. So I started like most as that collector, and I worked my way up the chain as a manager, an operations manager. And then I would like to call myself kind of the acquisitions kid. A company by the name of Encore came in and bought up a receivable of Fingerhut, and eventually I ended up working for Encore for a short stint. Then worked my way across the street, if you will, to a company by the name of Jefferson Capital here locally in Minnesota as well. And I actually ended up falling on this position through a connection in a relationship that I formed while I was at Encore. And they asked me to join the NCA team about 6 years ago and asked me to kind of take a different spin. I was mainly ops my whole career on that side of the things. And this was really more strategy. And it was really more overseeing the call center strategies, the legal strategies, the agency strategies. So really anything strategy you can think of points to me at some level with NCA.
That's awesome. And strategy is such an important part of it. But coming from operations, that must kind of lubricate that situation a little bit because you've got a deep understanding of what's actually happening, which enables you to try and predict the future, establish your strategies, and then come up with your tactical plans to execute. For those that are not familiar, and I know NCA or National Credit Adjusters is a sponsor at like every conference that I've been to in the last couple of years. But can you tell everybody a little bit about NCA and what you guys do there?
Sure. So National Credit Adjusters is nationally licensed debt buyer. And we specifically focused in on installment loan, short-term loan, online loan type products. That doesn't mean, though, that we don't also play in auto and all the other types of debt assets that are out there. We've been doing this now probably since the early 2000s. And we really, that's our focus, is just focused in on debt buying. We do some servicing, but it's very small scale. Primarily what we do is purchasing portfolios.
And so on the portfolios that you're purchasing, you're both leveraging internal collection efforts and kind of call center efforts, but also the leveraging of those third-party agencies and law firms?
That's right. And when I joined, my main goal was to identify firms and agencies that are going to help supplement the overall strategy of NCA, and how do we maximize that performance of that portfolio.
That makes a lot of sense. And that actually ties very well into our conversation. And based on the products that you were just talking about, right, where you've got kind of that core focus in those online type products, right? You're going to have a more technically sophisticated consumer in many instances, and probably why you guys are pushing into that digital communication space. That seems like kind of a natural fit. But rolling out digital communications is not like the easiest thing, right? Because it's not the same as you and I sending an email or a text message back and forth and communicating. What would you say are some of the mistakes that you've made as you've gone through the process of preparing and then rolling out your digital communication strategies?
Well, I mean, I could probably spend the next 3 hours talking through all those bumps, but I won't. I know we don't have that time. But honestly, some of the bigger mistakes that we didn't think through initially,
Hmm.
but now, obviously we've addressed and whatnot is something as simple as, you send an SMS to a consumer, and when that consumer responds, right, even if you're not planning to do two-way text, for example,
Hmm.
even though they're responding to you, we didn't think through the admin and the back support that needs to go with that, right? And
Okay.
you know, I know a text usually says reply stop, right? That's what you're hoping the consumer will tell you. Well, reality is consumers like to explain things in different words than just stop. And so, just to identify those, but not only just identify, but also to identify, all right, maybe this isn't the right channel of communication with that consumer,
Hmm.
based on what they're saying. So, one thing that we've learned from that is, we needed to get a two-way communication in
Hmm.
place with the consumer. So we have that ability to respond or react right away, versus kind of that static message of, hey, give us a call with questions, or anything like that. So, to me, that was one that was very apparent very early on, when we started sending out the messages to these consumers.
Fair, and definitely an interesting challenge, right? Being able to not just have that one-way communication, but to enable a two-way exchange of information, and then to track that information into your system of record. Did you have challenges getting that two-way communication into your,
Yeah.
call notes or however it is that
Yeah.
you're tracking it internally?
Yeah, so that yeah, so so absolutely, just short answer is yes. You have to capture that. You have to ingest it, right? Whether it's in your
Hmm.
system of record, and we have a fairly robust database where we analyze, right? We analyze activity. One of
Hmm.
my big things, and I've started to hear more and more of it, is just behavior analytics, right? Not so
Hmm.
much how does someone behave on your website and how do they navigate, right? What do they go to and point and click? But the behavior of the consumer, and
Hmm.
what is it that gets that consumer to respond, and really being able to analyze that. So you're ingesting SMS, you're ingesting email, you ingest all your forms of communication, and then really being able to quickly identify what is that best communication channel with that consumer, so you can target that strategy accordingly.
Well, that makes a lot of sense too. And I think when it comes to the digital communications and those system integrations and tying those pieces together, one thing is about getting that outbound communication to the consumer and getting them to respond. That's always a challenge in and of itself. And I don't want to take anything away from that. But then you've got to get them to actually engage with you in a digital format for the most part. You may be trying to get them to call as well. And but you're going to have a payment portal, or you're going to have some sort of digital location that you're trying to reduce the friction. How have you found that exchange to be? And are you guys looking at analytical funnels, right? Almost like a sales funnel as the consumers are going through the process?
Yeah, to a degree, right? Like, so, we're trying to set this up to be as self-serve as we can with our consumers. If you anchor back to what you mentioned earlier, we buy installment loan, short-term loan, online loan, those types of products. They're not so much always the brick and mortar product anymore. Obviously, a
Hmm.
lot of online type product. So look, the consumer establishes that relationship at one point that way. We want them to be able to kind of self-serve as
Sure.
well, and the ultimate goal there is have that portal in place. I learned this just through peers and just getting out within our industry relatively quickly. You need to have some kind of portal, and have a portal in place, something like that, so that these consumers that don't want to just talk old school. I'm old fashioned, I like to talk. Yeah, so
Hmm.
you call me, I'll talk to you, you're off. But most people don't like to communicate that way. Now it's more, let me take care of this myself, take care of my obligation, or use something other than a phone call, chatbot, email, SMS, whatever that looks like, to have those interactions. So when we're looking and just dissecting that, we're
Hmm.
trying to understand what are those funnels, what are those right areas to keep these consumers in, and avoid other communication channels that we just don't need to apply.
Understood. Understood. So you guys are in a, I don't call it a unique position because I think a lot of debt buyers operate in a similar fashion where you've got internal, collectors and call center, and then you've got your external collection agencies, law firms, and other vendors, right? And so as you're going through that process, right, like I know a lot of your collection agencies are probably going through the process of installing or deploying digital communications. How's that process look as you guys are kind of going through those things simultaneously? Are you learning anything from those third parties that you're able to, include in your deployments?
It's interesting. We have a couple actually agencies that were way ahead of us. They reached out, they asked, hey, can we start doing this? We reviewed content, policy, all the things you want to make sure you have in place. And we let them go ahead and start to deploy. We kind of caught up in terms of, now we're finally at a point where we're doing similar strategy. We haven't really gone down that path yet of, well, what are they doing to pull that into our strategies quite yet? But we are looking, doing like those champion challenger type efforts with them just to see how do we compare to them. But it is something that we definitely like to understand what they're doing. But look, if I'm an agency or whoever it is, if I give you 10 templates of text, yeah, you can go and try to use them, but I don't think it's so much about the content. It's about your cycle, and it's about the delivery and the timing of the messages and when the messages go out and what are they saying. And, are you sending a static message all the time? That probably isn't going to see the greatest result. Might even increase your opt-out rate because they're like, wait a minute, you keep sending me the same stuff. So you're trying to customize. And that's to me where the heart of it really starts to come into play is that. And how do you implement that strategy? And what, again, I go back to, and you mentioned it earlier, the analytics side of this. Like you got to be able to ingest, you got to be able to understand, because if you don't understand, you're just not going to know what are those levers to pull and what are those levers to make change.
That makes sense. And from an agency or from a debt buyer's perspective, I feel like digital communications is one of those things where the content really is far more important than people give it credit for. But I also agree with some of the things that you were saying here, because some of the things you were talking about is like the timing of the messages going out, right? And making sure that you're, messaging people at a time that is not only A, appropriate, but B, you probably don't want to message them at 9:05 a.m. Because they're already at work and you're not going to get that same kind of response. And it's the same kind of or similar, I'm assuming, timings to what we like to do from a social media perspective, because I don't go posting on LinkedIn at 9:05. If it's not out by 8:45, I miss my window, right? Like, because that's the time when people are engaging with those types of things. But I am curious about A/B testing as it relates to content. And I know that you guys are a little bit earlier in your digital journey, but that's definitely something that's always kind of intrigued me, is the use of A or B content to try and find and refine what is an effective content strategy. Because there's no way that a single static message is going to be an effective tool.
Right. Absolutely. And look, I mean, if the first one's just hey, this is who we are, get, whatever that is, go to our payment portal, check things out, maybe that's a start, right? And then after that, you have that established relationship with this consumer. Maybe it's you try to customize, it's more tailored to them. And, maybe it's Adam, still haven't seen that payment or whatever it is. I'm just making words up, right? But just something more personal for them, right? And trying to just create that kind of, I guess, relationship, that it isn't just kind of a set it and forget it, Ron Popeil type approach, if you remember who that is. But it's more customized to the consumer, right? The ultimate goal for us with any of it is what best suits the consumer. And whether that's phone call, email, text, and you quickly understand what means of communication they prefer, and then you shift gears and you try to accommodate that the best you can.
Well, this brings me back to the omni-channel versus the opti-channel approach, right? Omni-channel being that all of these channels. I can communicate down any of these 5 channels and I can carry the context between them. Where Optichannel is identifying the right channel for the right consumer at the right moment in time and then reaching out to them on that channel. You're optimizing the channel of communication that you're ultimately selecting for them. But that is an art form. And it's going to take, I think, time for our algorithms and things to really be able to predict that to a more finite level. But I do believe that we're all kind of moving more in that direction, like you're talking about, being able to analyze that communication information, that comms data, and better understand what am I looking at and what is the intent and experience of the person that I'm communicating with, and how do I feel about that? Because the consumer experience is king, right? Like that's the most important factor in getting them to pay, helping them to understand financial obligations and all of the things that go along with it. But I'm curious as to, have you guys started looking, it sounds like you're already looking at how to get to an Optichannel approach.
Yeah, and we're not quite there, but the quick answer is yeah. I mean, that's the ultimate goal with all of this, is to have as many communication channels available, and then from there, what's the optimal, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because back in the day when I joined, I pulled up postcards and I did the same communication channel. I called people, punched the 10 digits, and we called and went. And that's how it was. Well, through the last how many years that is, evolutions occurred. We've evolved, and regulators came out and given us nice guidance on how to leverage more than just the old traditional phone, and it's really helped. And I'm really excited about this. Like, this is just what I love to dig into, is all the digital stuff, and how can we optimize the strategy as well as serve the consumer in a fashion they want to be served in. Because the reality is, people don't want phone calls, right? They just don't want them as often as we once were used to. And you've heard this, and everyone's heard, 95% of people read a text within less than 5 minutes. We've heard that data, right? Or Americans in general look at their phone 340 plus times a day. Well, if you think about some of that, and then you think about text and email and the alerts that occur on people's phones, it just makes sense. It's a very easy way to communicate, and hopefully less disruptive for the consumer. That's the ultimate goal. We try not to disrupt them.
I think you're on the right path here, and I look forward to continuing to check in with you throughout the year at the various shows that I'm sure I'm going to see you at, but where NCA, or National Credit Adjusters, is in their digital communication strategies and journey. So happy to be a resource as you guys continue forward. It's always great for us to have these chats. For those of you that are watching, if you have additional questions that you'd like to ask Rick or myself, you can leave those in the comments below on YouTube or LinkedIn, and we'll be happy to respond to those. If you have additional topics that you'd like to see us cover, you can leave those in the comments below as well. And I'm willing to bet I can get Rick back out here again to continue creating great content for a great industry. Rick, again, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you coming on.
Appreciate the invite, Adam. Anytime, always here for you.
Greatly appreciated. And for those of you that are watching, if there's anything else you'd like to ask, put it in the comments. Continue, follow, comment, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you so much.